Yay! Please stay tuned for the explanation on how to solve this problem. Hi everyone, my name is Kaila Mayho, and today we are going to go over a Java programming exercise called complex operations. Now, for any of you that are following this Udemy course, I have uploaded these videos out of order. As we all know, we're not all perfect. Coding can be hard sometimes, and this program was definitely one that tripped me up. So I hope it helps you if you guys are having problems. If you guys did have a problem with this one when you started off, please leave it in the comments below. I would love to know. So anyone that's new, we're going to start off with reading the problem first, making sure we understand the logic of what's going on, and then start coding on the right. As you guys saw a few seconds ago, the code does work, but I don't want you guys to just take the answer and run with it. It's better for you guys to understand what's going on with the problem, because when it comes to, say you want to create programs on your own, or you may have a coding interview or a test or something along those lines, you have to know how to code these things on the spot, because they'll just give you a problem or a scenario or something like this, less than this maybe, and you have to be able to produce the code needed to get the correct answer. So let's get started. A complex number is a number that can be expressed in the form of a plus b I, where a and b are real numbers and I is a solution of the equation x. I believe this is x to the power of 2 equals -1. Because no real number satisfies this equation, I is called an imaginary number. For the complex number a plus bi, a is called the real part and b is called the imaginary part. To add or subtract two complex numbers, just add or subtract the corresponding real and imaginary parts. For instance, the sum of 3 plus 3i and 4 plus 2i is 9 plus 5i. For another, the sum is 3 plus I and -1 plus 2i is 2 plus 3i. Write a class with the name complex number. The class needs two fields, instances variables, the name real and imaginary of type double. It represents the complex number. The class needs to have one constructor. The constructor has parameters real and imaginary of type double, and it needs to initialize the fields. Write the following methods, or instant methods. We have one method that's getReal without any parameters, and it returns the value of real. GetImaginary without parameters returns the value of imaginary. Then we have add with two parameters of real and imaginary of type double. It needs to add parameters to fields. In other words, it needs to do a complex number add operation as described above. Method named add, one parameter of type complex number. It needs to add the complex number parameter to the corresponding instance variables. Method named subtract with two parameters, real and imaginary of type double. It needs to subtract parameters from fields. In other words, it needs to do a complex number subtraction operation as described above. And last but not least, we need one more method named subtract with one parameter other of type complex number. It needs to subtract the other parameter from this complex number. Okay, so as we can see, they give us some test code. which I have right here in the main class, and we also have some tests. We have the output that it should be based on the code, and it says try to avoid duplicate code. All methods should be defined as public, not public static. We have 6 methods, and we don't need to add the main method here. So let's get started. So more importantly, it's important to understand this last line in bold. For you to really understand what's going on with complex numbers. I'm sure many people at first had several ideas on how to do this, right? You know, we see in the test code, we're just passing the numbers around. I know the I part gets weird. In this case, if you were to use the I, I'm pretty sure with this program, it would be a hard-coded. If anybody just wanted to be fancy and throw the I in there, the I is hard-coded. But for the sake of this problem, we're not going to implement the I because it's not needed. They focus on the numbers. But again, if you wanted to put in the I, you can. I would just hard-code it in a printout statement. So let's get started. We do know we need 2 instant variables of real and imaginary of type double. So let's put that in our class. And we know they're private because these are classes. When you're in classes, you want to have private variables so that they can't just be used anywhere amongst all of the classes because it would make it confusing. So we have our 2 variables declared, real and imaginary. Now we need 1 constructor that passes the real and imaginary parameters and initializes those parameters. Public complex number, double real and double imaginary. This dot real equals real, and this dot imaginary equals imaginary. So just for a second, just so you guys can see where lines 9 through 11 is called, it's called right here on lines 5 and 6. When we initialize these values, you guys can see it even marked it for us, the variables. It's going to call this constructor here, and it's going to store the values inside of this complex number inside of the class. So let's get started on the methods. We have 6 methods. We're going to start with the 2 easiest ones, which are basically the getters. We should all know what getters are. So we're just going to let intellji do the work here for these ones. We're just going to get the getters, which is get imaginary and get real. So boom, those first 2 are done. If you guys want to know what these do, basically all it does is exactly what it says, they're getters. So when we call them in main, I could show you right here on lines 9 and 10, 13 and 14, and 17 and 18. All it's doing is grabbing those values from this class and displaying it inside of the main method. Alright, so now let's get to the add methods. And it's easier to start off with the one that passes 2 parameters. So we have a public add method that's going to take in 2 parameters of real and imaginary. if you guys are wondering why these these methods are void, it's because we're not returning anything. So, like this says, we need to add the parameters to fields, add two parameters to fields. In other words, we need to do a complex number add operation as described above. So again, what they mean here is we need to do the math, like right here. So we know if we want to kind of try to visualize it, right? So if we go back to main, for example, if we're focusing on 1, right? 1 is the complex number we're using. So we called line 5. It stored real as 1 and imaginary as 1. So we passed 1 and 1 and stored them in here that didn't have values, right? Then it came back to the main method and it said, okay, complex number 1 is here, and then we're gonna take the real 1 and the real imaginary that was just given to us, and we're gonna add it to what we already know. So then we're gonna go back to complex numbers. So we have 1 and 1 here, and we have 1 and 1 up here. So in order to add those together, we're gonna add them together, and then we want to store them back into complex number 1. In order to do that, instead of doing complex number 1, I'm going to create a new complex number that's only good for within this method called temp. And then we're going to store the values that we passed in here. Okay, so then this dot real, this is basically complex 1. So this dot real equals this dot real plus temp. Okay, so now we did that. So now we're gonna do the other add method. If we scroll down, again, if you guys, all we're doing here on line 16 and 17 is it's like I said earlier. So we're basically taking the 1 from complex numbers and it's adding to 1. So this should be 2, but then it's adding 1 and 1, so that should be 2 as well. Now we're going to create one more method that just uses complex number, and it needs to add complex number to the corresponding instant variables. So this is the same thing as the other add, except for we're not going to need the temporary complex number since the complex number is going to be passed. So it's still going to be public void add complex number. Do they tell us what they want to title it? No, so we'll just title it C. And it will be this dot real equals C dot get real. So as you can see, like I was telling you earlier, those getters come in handy in both the main method and the class that we created them in. This imaginary equals get equals C dot get imaginary plus Okay. So we did both the adds. Now we're going to do the subtracts, which are also similar, as you guys can see. Where for one of them we're passing parameters 2, and the other we're passing 1 parameter. So just to save on time a little bit, I am going to copy and paste this, but I'm going to still make the adjustments here for you guys to see them. So if I repaste the add, I'm going to start off by changing the subtracts so we know that these are duplicates. And look at that, already about to mess up the whole thing. The duplicates are down here. Subtract, even if not, what happened there. And I'll change the parameters too, just so it doesn't confuse you guys. If you guys are getting confused with things being the same name. So we're going to change this to a subtract, change this to a subtract. Okay, so it's saying we have a problem, but it's not a big one, whatever it is, whatever it could be. Let's save this. Okay. So from the looks to me, everything should be fine. I'm gonna change subtract to these, like I said, just to make it a little less confusing on you guys. Okay, so now we're gonna run it and build it on my side and see if we get the same response. It doesn't look like we did. Okay, so let's debug it and see what happens. So we see the first 2 lines are right, and then we can see when it goes to add, right, it should be a negative, but it's a positive number. So to see what happened there, we go to this one. Okay. It should be a negative real. Not real. So that one actually has to do with the subtracting. So if we switch over, but you know this happens to me all the time. We basically have to switch the places of these attributes in order for them to work correctly, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, because all that's happening is it should be a negative, not a positive number. As I'm doing here, in order to fix it, basically all that happened was the way I have the subtraction set up is backward. So the new variables or the new complex number that's being created when it's passed has to go second, and what's already stored in the class has to go first. So let's go ahead and try it again. You see we get a -5, we get a 3.5, we get a 3, and we get a -5. Alright. So see guys, sometimes fixing the errors isn't all that bad. It's pretty easy. So now let's copy our class over we just made into the Udemy tester and see if we get it right against all of the tests that Udemy comes up with. Fingers crossed, guys. Every little bit of luck counts, guys. Alright, and we got it on the first, well, technically second try. So, again, if you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. If you guys learned something new, please don't hesitate to leave a like, share, follow the social media links, and just keep coding, guys. You know it's hard, it gets rough, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. So, code with you guys next time. Bye!